What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. And I just saw some very, very sad news. And that is that famed fitness guru Richard Simmons, known for his sweating to the oldies VHS tapes back in the 80s and into the 1990s, was found deceased today in his home by his housekeeper. She found him unresponsive. I think police and paramedics were called to the scene and they pronounced him dead. Um, he had just issued a thank you from his ex account. Yesterday was his 76th birthday. He said on his account, "Thank you. I never got so many messages about my birthday in my life. I am sitting here writing emails. Have a most beautiful rest of your Friday. Love, Richard." And it's been reported now that he took a fall yesterday evening or last night. Now, I don't want to speculate because I don't know his medical history and I don't know what was going on with him, but I do know that I think it was either earlier this year or last year he was diagnosed with a melanoma. Now, I do know that sometimes when you undergo chemotherapy treatments, it can lead you susceptible to bleeding. So it's a possibility. I'm just speculating here. I'm just putting this out there. It's a possibility that a fall could have caused some internal bleeding that went unchecked. And he could have had some other issues going on health wise. But like I said, we don't know exactly what is going on with him at this time. But he was born back in 1948, July the 12th, 1948, in Louisiana. And of course, Louisiana has a rich food culture. And he grew up an overweight child with a love of food. And he grew up to an overweight young adult. He was about 270 pounds at one point when he was a young man. And I guess he was having self esteem issues at that time. And he eventually grew to embrace um, and was motivated to lose weight. He lost, I think, something like over 100 pounds. And Richard was a very, um, he was a very sensitive person, but he was also a very, very good natured individual. I think one of the very few good natured individuals that we've seen um, in the entertainment industry. And he loved to help other people. I remember him inspiring other people who were overweight, severely overweight, to not just lose weight, but also what Richard did, I remember, is he didn't want to just have people lose weight. He wanted to build their self esteem because he knew how a lot of people who are overweight, part of the problem isn't just the weight. The problem is the low self esteem. Because this is what a lot of people who don't struggle with weight issues don't get. When you get beat up mentally, when you're constantly berated for your weight, um, it becomes a mindset. And even with some people, when they lose weight, they still see themselves as the fat person. They still see themselves as less than. And one of the things that they do to cope is eat. So it's a vicious cycle. And Richard was aware of that. So he didn't just get people to, lose weight. It was also changing a lifestyle, embracing exercise, and also just, you know, being a better person. So I'm not going to sit around like I was the biggest, huge Richard Simmons but he was definitely a part of our culture growing up in the 80s and 90s. And he sort of just disappeared from the scene about, might have been more than 10 years ago now. I think it was more than 10 years ago. He just disappeared. I just assumed that he was having some health issues. I read something about issues with his knees. And, he had always been a person that was sort of animated and lively. And I think he was very image conscious. So I think that was part of it, and I wouldn't be surprised too if Richard, with health issues, he might have put on some weight. So I'm like, that's a speculation. Um, but he was very image conscious, and he didn't want his fans to see him in a way that he didn't want them to see him. There was a documentary that was either, I think it's either came out or it was filmed, and it might have premiered. I forget, but I know it came out recently, or at least it was filmed recently. And Pauly Shore played Richard Simmons. And initially, I think Richard Simmons was very negative about it, but I think he had a change of heart. But you know what's so funny? I was just talking about this to a friend of mine. Doesn't it seem like every time one of these documentaries comes out about a living subject, they die like almost immediately after? Like this situation, Ray Charles back in 2004. There's been some other instances recently where there was a documentary film or docu-series that came out about a living subject, and the person expired like that same year. I just can't think of off the top of my head other instances, but it's definitely something that seems to happen a lot. But rest in peace to Richard Simmons, man. I do remember this too. I remember earlier this year he put out I think it was a tweet where he insinuated that he was dying, and or just straight out said he was dying, and his fans they got really sad about it. And then Richard came back and said, "No, I'm not dying right now." He meant like in the sense that we're all slowly dying from birth. Just some of us it's a more expedited process, but maybe he really was dying, and he just had a change of heart from the reaction of his fans. Um, I remember Jackie Gleason. I remember reading that when he started having his health issues the last year or two of his life, and he suffered from a lot of health issues because if you know anything about Jackie Gleason, he led a very unhealthy lifestyle, and that began to catch up to him as he got older. But he had to be in a lot of pain at the end. I'm not trying to make this about Jackie, but I'll make a point. He had issues with diabetes, he had circulatory issues, he had gout, he had phlebitis, I believe. He cancer, but it was a slow spreading cancer. And he had something called thrombosed hemorrhoids, which is very, very painful. Very, very painful. I don't want to get too graphic. But he didn't want any of these things put out there. And to some of his fans, his death was a surprise in 1987 because they didn't know that he had been that sick. But he didn't want his fans sad. He didn't want his fans to look at the Honeymooners or the Smokey Bandit movies or any of his comedies and be sad. So I'm thinking that the same thing with Richard Simmons. He didn't want to have his fans sad about anything. So this is a man that always wanted to bring joy into the world. So rest in peace, Richard Simmons.